Internet land. My name is Brianna Lovell, and I am the Outreach and Events Manager here at Alley Cat Allies, and I will be your moderator today. So before we get going, I do want to just go over a few little things. So I would encourage everyone out there today to grab a pen and pencil and just be prepared to take some notes. We have a lot of information that we're going to go over, and we hope that you will find it to be helpful. So for your convenience, we have also uploaded some PDFs that we will reference throughout the presentation, and you can find those in the handout section of your GoToWebinar toolbar. So please do open those, download them, and use them. So while we're talking, now is also a great time to double check your audio connection and just be sure that the speakers are on and your volume is up. So if we move too fast, or if you happen to miss some of the information, please do not worry. You will receive a link to a recorded session and a follow-up email. All of our archived webinars are also available anytime for free at alleycat.org/webinar. This, of course, includes the first webinar in this series, our Cat Advocacy 101, which you will also hear referenced. And so if you didn't see that webinar already and you would like to catch up on what you might have missed, be sure to go to alleycat.org/webinar. So, and finally, you will be receiving, in addition to the recording after today's session, in the email you receive, you'll see a link to a brief survey. And this is really important because we do look for your feedback. So please do let us know what you thought. And if you have any ideas for webinars you'd like to see us put together in the future, we would love to know that too. So we will have some time for questions at the end of today's presentation, and you can submit those to us using the questions box in your GoToWebinar toolbar. I will be keeping an eye on those throughout the presentation, and so when we are ready to talk about your questions, we'll be going through that at the end of the presentation. Just be sure to submit those using your GoToWebinar toolbar. And you can also go to alleycat.org/response, the link there at the bottom of your screen, for more general answers. And so please do remember that today is going to be focused on advocacy questions and working with elected officials. So while I have your attention, I'm going to selfishly pitch our Feral Friends Network, which is one of the great programs I get to work with here at Alley Cat Allies. And basically, it is a resource directory which consists of caring individuals and organizations worldwide who are dedicated to helping community cats and other individuals in their community who are concerned about the cats. So if you would like to access the list and see who else is working in your community, I encourage you to visit alleycat.org/find-feral-friends. If you, however, feel like you have the skill set and you're prepared to help other people who are just beginning their own journey to help the cats, I would encourage you to learn more and submit an application at alleycat.org/feral-friends. We are always looking to build our resource directory so we can help even more people and save even more lives. So back to the reason we are all here today. We are going to be covering the following topics during this presentation: researching your local government structure, legislators, and shelter systems, preparing for meetings with legislators, and speaking effectively about trap-neuter return. And here to share all of that great information with you is our Associate Director of Law and Policy, Liz Holt. Liz is an attorney and holds a JD from Georgetown University Law Center. She researches policy issues surrounding cats and regularly advises local governments on drafting TNR-positive legislation. In 2013, she published Trap-Neuter Return Ordinances and Policies in the United States, The Future of Animal Control. The PDF is attached in your handout section, and it was the first comprehensive study of its kind. In the past year, she's advocated and written and contributed to more than 10 humane policies and worked on dozens of others, which were passed by local governments throughout the country. And so as you can see on your screen, if you have specific questions relating to advocacy, Liz has kindly given us her email address. And I would just remind you that if you have general community cat and trap-neuter return questions, that our alleycat.org response link will be the best resource for you to use. So without further ado, I now give you Liz.
Hi guys, as Bree said, my name is Liz Holtz and I'm really excited to be giving the second step in my Community Cat Advocacy webinars. Just as a note, this is the first time I've ever done this, not webinars, don't worry, this is the first time I've done this particular webinar, so this is all hopefully brand new stuff and we might have a few kinks. So any suggestions you have at the end, you can email to me, so try to be nice if you can, but I'm definitely open to any constructive feedback. So why does advocacy matter? When I talk to people about advocacy in communicating with their local legislators, the most common response I get is, I hate politics, I just want to take care of cats. And I definitely sympathize with this stance. Politics can be discouraging, frustrating, and time-consuming. But since you asked, I have two pieces of advice about this. First of all, I understand that someone who spends dozens of hours a week trapping cats might not have the time or patience to take on the role of legislative advocate. People have natural strengths and weaknesses and might be better suited to one or the other. With that said, sometimes you don't have a choice. You can't do TNR in a vacuum, pun intended for my TNR friends. You are doing TNR in a city or county, presumably if you're in this country, or really anywhere. I'm not aware of any lawless lands. So you are doing TNR in a place with laws. They have animal control ordinances and animal control officers or police officers that can help you out, or on the flip side, give you a citation. And we receive many calls every week from people who have successfully employed TNR only to have their neutered colony safety later threatened. So it's important to at least have these skills in your back pocket to be able to articulately and persuasively advocate for cats. And I want to make sure everyone knows about the Advocacy Toolkit. It has talking points for every municipal cat issue, from TNR to leash laws to licensing. There's no need to reinvent the wheel, though you can always improve on the wheel. And there should be a link on your screen to the toolkit. We can also mail you hard copies. So let's get started. You need to figure out what kind of government your community has. And I understand this might be elementary for some of you. I'm not trying to imitate Schoolhouse Rock, but these are some questions we get. So I'm just going to break things down to very simple levels just for people who might not be familiar. So Frank the Feral. Frank the Feral lives at Alley Cat Allies in Bethesda, Maryland. Bethesda is unincorporated. So Frank the Feral is represented by county government, Montgomery County. But our neighbors in Rockville, Maryland, also in Montgomery County, have a separate city council. It gets even more confusing because Rockville has its own animal control, but uses the county shelter. So Rockville citizens are impacted by both the county and the city's decisions on animal control. Just something to keep in mind that could happen to you if you're one of the unlucky people who have like 5 different jurisdictions controlling your animal control stuff. So usually your government will be called a city council with council members and a mayor, or a county commission with commissioners. But there are all sorts of other names like board of representatives, board of supervisors, board of trustees, and essentially they have the same function but different names. It's definitely even confusing to me when I see something like board of trustees, because to me that sounds like a bank or something. But they virtually mean the same thing. It just means the legislators who are legislating at that local level. So cities and counties are usually divided into smaller parts, which are sometimes called districts or boroughs. So again, Frank the Feral lives in Bethesda, Maryland, which is within Montgomery County. And I looked online for a district map of Montgomery County, and I found out that Frank lives in District 1, which you can see is the green portion of the map. And his representative is Roger Berliner. Researching your local legislators. There's likely a list of legislators, council members, commissioners, board members on your local government's website. There might even be biographical information and political affiliation listed on the website. You're going to want to research each legislator to get a general idea of their stance on issues. At the local government level, political affiliation is not generally an indicator of how the person will vote on companion animal issues. In other words, whether a person is a Republican or a Democrat won't really tell you if they are going to support TNR. But having a general idea about the legislator will help you forge a relationship. And when I say research each legislator, I don't mean anything fancy. I mean go to your search engine of choice, Google, put in the name, and see what comes up. I also want to take a minute to talk about personal connections. A lot of politics is who you know. So if you went to high school with the mayor of your town, then you need to pick up the phone and tell them about TNR. Right now. Stop the webinar and just call, because you're going to be a much more effective advocate if you call the mayor than finishing this webinar. You can come back later. Now, he might not agree with you. In fact, he might even be known as an anti-animal guy or someone who's scared of dogs. But because you know each other, he's going to at least, hopefully, politely listen. Most likely, or more likely rather, you'll know someone who knows someone. So if your cousin is friends with the city manager, then ask your cousin to set up a meeting for you. It's a small favor, but it can have a huge impact. And the personal connections, definitely don't feel bad if you don't have any. I don't have any. The smaller the town you live in, the more likely you are to have a connection. I've lived in the DC area my entire life. I have never met President Obama. I do not have any connections because I live in a giant county, and I'm not that fancy. But if you happen to live in a small town, there's a good chance that you have a connection that you might not even know about. So researching animal control and shelter. Many communities share a shelter. Like in the example with Rockville, a city may contract with a larger county shelter. Many governments also contract with nonprofit humane societies. This can be confusing because it seems like a shelter is private, but they aren't really. In the capital of West Virginia, Charleston, the Kanawha-Charleston Humane Association is a 501c3 nonprofit that holds the contract for animal sheltering for all the individual cities in Kanawha County. Even more confusing is that some of those cities also use the nonprofit for animal control, while other places, like a little town called Dunbar, West Virginia, has its own animal control officer who brings animals to the Kanawha-Charleston Humane Association. And you can just go online to research those shelters. It's also good to get the shelter's intake and euthanasia statistics. This will help you make your argument, and it will help legislators understand why change is needed. You can file a public information request with the shelter directly or with the city. I usually ask for the last 2 years of data broken down by month and species, i.e. how many dogs were impounded, euthanized, adopted. And if you've listened to my first webinar, I go into a bit more detail about obtaining shelter statistics, but I thought it was worth repeating because it's so important. It takes the emotion out of the argument. You're not saying this person is killing lots of cats. You're saying these are the numbers from 2013, these are the numbers from 2014. You can see their intake is going up and euthanasia is going up. And people will respect that you've taken the time to really research the issue. Research your community. I touch on something that I call the cat climate in my other webinar. The cat climate refers to what's happening in your community related to companion animals. There might be another group already advocating for TNR. Perhaps another animal-related ordinance, like about pit bulls or backyard chickens are popular right now, was introduced last year and passed, or failed. Maybe a feeding ban was introduced and failed 2 years ago. You'll want to do research online to find out the groups who are already involved and see how legislators reacted in the past. Any recent reports of rabies or information about the local shelter will also help you better understand the cat climate. And I know you might be thinking feral cats or community cats are quite different from backyard chickens, and they are, but anything sort of animal related at the local level, I'll tell you, well, it's not much of a secret, but legislators kind of group animal people all together, even if you've never met a community cat or you've never so much as touched a pit bull. We're all kind of in the same camp in their eyes. So you have to be aware of all the issues involving local animals. You don't need to know what's going on with the zoo, but any companion animal, you should know the history. Researching your ordinance. Finding your local animal control ordinance should be easy. Just Google the name of your city and ordinances. So I would type in Montgomery County Ordinance. Find the section about animal control. Reading it can be a bit more difficult. What you're looking for are laws regulating cats. An important thing to look at is the definition of owner. Is owner defined so that if you feed a cat, you're the owner? Do cats need to be licensed? Are cats allowed to be outdoors or quote-unquote at large? Is there a limit on the number of pets that you may own? Are there restrictions on outdoor feeding? And I suggest that you review our advocacy toolkit starting on page 4. It lists the most common types of ordinances affecting cats. Researching the ordinance is absolutely essential because it lets you know what to ask the council for. If cats are not allowed to be at large or must be licensed, you should consider asking that the ordinance be amended to allow community cats to be at large and not be licensed. In other words, you're going to be asking the council to exempt community cats from laws aimed at pet cats. The local legislative process. The process of passing a law varies from city to city widely. I've worked on cities where an ordinance can be introduced and voted on in the same night. I've also worked in locations where an ordinance has to be introduced, and then there are 3 public hearings, and then they vote. It could take 5 city council meetings and maybe 5 months. I've seen it take up to 1.5 years, which is in the extreme. But you'll need to research the process. Some of the basics are the same. A proposed law is submitted by either a city councilman or county commissioner, or occasionally a government staff member can introduce an ordinance. That's rarer. As a member of the public, you cannot introduce a law yourself. You can, however, ask your legislator to present a law that you want. Whoops, I got too excited and went ahead. So back to the local legislative process. Recently in Bryan, Texas, a person who does TNR in her neighborhood approached her council member and asked that the ordinance be changed to exempt community cats from restrictions like no cats outdoors. The councilman then introduced the law for her. The law then passed. This is a great example of the democratic process, though it's not always that easy. The ordinance language is usually sent to various departments, including the legal department, for their comments. The ordinance is given a number to identify it and possibly a date when it will be introduced. So a bill might say bill number 34A, and that's the official name of that ordinance. Cities often post the agendas of their meetings online so you can see all the bills that they'll be considering that night. Then the bill is actually introduced at the meeting. The public should be given a time to comment. The time for comment might be at the beginning, when anyone can sign up to speak on any issue, or it might be directly after the ordinance is introduced or read, and your comments should only relate to the ordinance at hand. So now's not the time to be talking about chickens if the ordinance is about cats. Depending on when the bill will be voted on, you need to start rallying the troops. Look in our advocacy toolkit about ways to get your community members to contact the council and ask them to support the policy. Now we're at making the case to legislators, which is the main point of this webinar. And you might notice that this slide is kind of similar to the one in my first webinar, but it's that important. If you've managed to secure a meeting or you plan on testifying, create an outline. I'm just going to say it again, create an outline. I do it, and I've been here 4 years. So I know the issues pretty well, but I think outlines are great and they help you stay on topic. And an outline doesn't need to be fancy. I just suggest jotting down the key points that you want to cover, or even writing your whole speech out beforehand. And keep it simple. Use statistics and scientific studies to make your case. We have great resources on our website with links to some of the key scientific studies proving the efficacy of TNR. Print out the studies and include them in your packets to council members. They might not take the time to read them, but they will be assured that there is scientific and veterinary support for TNR. Consider creating a fact sheet that is tailored to what you think the council's main concerns are, perhaps public health or nuisance issues. Be sure to appeal to the legislators' financial concerns. They might think that you're proposing an expensive program. Instead, you need to make them realize that TNR is less expensive in the long run because it stops the cycle of breeding. If the city continues to trap and kill, the city can be certain it will have the same amount or more next year, along with housing all the new kittens that have been born. And again, this is not the webinar that covers in detail the arguments for TNR. That's the first webinar. This is building on that. One-on-one meetings with legislators. Consider scheduling a meeting with one of your legislators. Your legislator, the person who represents the district you live in, is the obvious first choice. Their job is to represent your interests. However, if you think this legislator won't be friendly to animal welfare issues, or you know that another legislator has a demonstrated interest in animal welfare, you might want to start with them. That's why it's important to do background research, as I mentioned earlier. If you don't live in the district of this legislator who might be friendly to animal welfare, then it's always a good plan to find someone who is a constituent, meaning someone who lives in his district, to come along or actually schedule the meeting. I also get asked a lot, how do you schedule a meeting? There's nothing too complicated about it. You call or email using the contact information on the city's website. And I understand, I've spoken to a lot of people who have some trepidation about calling because they feel like they're not important enough or they're not smart enough to meet with a city council member. And I promise you, your council member will be polite. They want your votes. And it's your right as a citizen. And I'm sure they often deal with lots of people who are, a lot crazier than you could ever be. So I'm sure they would be happy to speak to someone who has a well-researched argument and is polite. So you can be scared, but don't let that fear stop you. Addressing the opposition. It's important to be truthful with the council member. Legislators do not like to be surprised. Maybe you've done such an excellent job explaining TNR that the legislator says, this is great. Why would anyone be opposed to it? And that's wonderful, but you don't want to give them the impression that there's no opposition to TNR. Believe me, they will find out eventually. You will only lose their trust if they ask and you say, everyone's for it. When people ask me who opposes TNR, I say that the primary groups are bird groups who mistakenly believe that euthanizing cats will reduce the community cat population, people concerned about nuisance, people worried about health, and people worried about the welfare of the cats. Now, if the person doesn't ask, you need to make a judgment call on whether or not to discuss it in the very first meeting. Explaining the opposition also gives you a chance to counter all of those arguments and get in beforehand. Some people try to refute each point one by one, but I've found that can be distracting, and here's why. TNR is the only effective approach to community cats that we have right now. We can do nothing, we can do TNR, or we can trap and kill. Decades of trapping and killing have resulted in where we are today. So whenever someone says, we can't do TNR because cats could spread rabies, you could note that cats are not a rabies risk, and no cat has transmitted rabies to a human in this country for decades. and you can go online at the link that should be on your screen for more information about public health and community cats. But even saying that implies that trapping and killing is a legitimate or effective option. But it's not, because it doesn't work. So I say, if you are concerned about rabies, why are you supporting a policy that resulted in lots of community cats that also stops people from vaccinating more cats against rabies? And the same thing goes for bird advocates and people concerned about welfare. Then the ultimate goal for everyone is to reduce the community cat population. With that said, I know some people still prefer to have concrete speaking points to refute the most common issues that people have. And I found it pretty helpful to put things in a Q&A format. Sometimes I kind of try to anticipate what the questions will be, and I print them out on a few pages and pass them out to people. So we've compiled the most common questions and answers in the following slides for you. Here's the #1 question I hear. I take care of my cat, why shouldn't caregivers be forced to follow the same rules? Or the common variation, I take care of my dog, why shouldn't community cat caregivers be forced to follow the same rules? And here is the eloquent answer that we spent lots of time putting into, so the wording's just right. You might want to memorize it because this is a tricky question, but here we go. Community cat caregivers care for outdoor cats, but are not the owners of these cats. Caregivers neither create nor maintain the community cat population. Rather, they are good Samaritans stepping forward to protect the descendants of animals who were lost or abandoned by pet owners. Without someone stepping in to spay-neuter these animals, the population will continue to grow. Prohibiting trap-neuter return is costly for taxpayers, who must address more cats down the line. Boom. There you go. That's our nice, concise answer. And the reason that I've really emphasized sort of memorizing this or having a statement is because this question drives me crazy. It's like saying, you know, it makes no sense because community cats are not the same as dogs, are not the same as pet cats. So my reaction is to be like, are you not very smart? These are totally different issues. But saying something like that is not only rude, it's not very effective. Next question. I don't want cats on my property, so why should I support trap-neuter return? Or I hear this phrased as, Americans have the right not to have cats on their property. Here's the answer. Community cats already exist, whether you want them or not, and trap-neuter return is the only effective way to reduce the population. Cities have employed trap and kill for decades to no avail due to the vacuum effect. Adopting trap-neuter return is the best way to reduce the number of community cats, save taxpayers money, and improve conditions at the municipal animal shelter. Removing cats from an area creates a vacuum effect. Cats from neighboring areas move into the newly available space to take advantage of the still existing food and shelter. The former president of the National Animal Control Association, Mark Kumpf, had likened attempts to limit the community cat population by removing cats to bailing the ocean with a thimble. And a quick note on that, when I encourage all of you, if you're not familiar with the vacuum effect, to go on our website and learn more. When I say removing cats just makes other cats move into the newly available space to take advantage of food and shelter, it's important to be prepared to clarify that you're not talking about food that people are putting out or little cat shelters that people have built. That's not the reason that cats are there, and that's why feeding bans don't work. For whatever reason, these cats have found that they're safe from predators, they have a water source, there's lots of trash, they have a natural shelter. For whatever reason, this area is good for cats. So again, you want to emphasize that it doesn't matter if you stop people from feeding these cats on purpose, the vacuum effect will still occur. And finally, cats are a nuisance and I hate them, or just, I hate cats, which is not a question, but a statement you will likely encounter. And something that local legislators are frequently worried about is public nuisance. And this is because they're supposed to respond to their constituents' concerns. And they don't want to hear from other voters who are angry about TNR because they don't want cats in their yards. Again, you can use the argument about the vacuum effect and that trapping and killing doesn't work. But you should also mention humane deterrence and strategies to help people live peacefully with community cats. And you can check out our brochure, How to Live with Cats, for more information about humane deterrence. You can also click on that helpful resource link to learn more about deterrence. And you're going to want to note that trap, neuter, return reduces the number of intact and unvaccinated cats in the community. Neutering reduces objectionable behaviors like spraying and yowling. Sterilized cats simply make better neighbors. There are also simple but effective steps you can take to deter cats from a property, like spreading coffee grounds or ultrasonic cat deterrence. So moving on, public speaking, something I know that everyone loves. This is a picture of me doing some public speaking, and you can see that I survived. I did not die. I'm here to give you this webinar. And even though I'm naturally kind of shy and I don't love public speaking, I've just learned to grin and bear it. But we're going to talk about the mechanics of public speaking right now. So there's a couple of different options. Most likely, you will be given a few minutes to speak before the City Council at a council hearing if you sign up as a speaker. Occasionally, and this is very occasionally, you will have the chance to give a longer presentation, like a 30-minute PowerPoint presentation to the council. But this is much more likely if you're a shelter employee, a government employee, or the head of a very well-known nonprofit. Getting on the agenda. So how do you even get on the agenda in the first place? So this is copied and pasted from the City of Rockville's website, and this is how you do it there. Now, every place is different, but I like this example because it covers two different types of public comments. You can check your local government's website to see if they have instructions. If there isn't anything about getting on the agenda as a speaker, just call the clerk. If you can't find a clerk or you can't find anyone to give you the answer, just show up to the meeting in person early and ask whoever you see. So the Rockville example. If you want to speak at the community forum, you can sign up in advance by calling the city clerk's office by 4 p.m. on the day of the meeting, or you can just show up. If you want to testify at a public hearing, you can call again the city clerk's office by 4 p.m. on the date of the hearing, or email testimony. And you can see it says priority will be given to speakers who have signed up in advance. That means that you can still just show up and sign up. And in fact, the majority of the time, I just show up and sign up because we hear about things sometimes at the last minute, so we don't have the luxury of signing up. And I've always been allowed to speak. Obviously, there's a small chance that you might not be able to, but governments are pretty flexible. Local governments are pretty flexible, and they want to hear from their constituents. 3-minute testimony before council. So as I said, people are generally allotted between 2 and 3 minutes to speak, but it can vary widely. So we're going to discuss what information to present if you just have 3 minutes. You're going to want to introduce yourself, your affiliation with the rescue group or experience with this issue. Keep your history extremely short. Do not discuss your rescue animals or offer stories about your cats. This can make you seem unprofessional. Simply saying, I am an animal welfare advocate, or I have practiced TNR for 5 years, or I am a member of Caring Hands Rescue League and I've practiced TNR for 10 years is sufficient. State your request and make it specific. It is not helpful to ask the council to protect cats or improve the shelter or care more about dogs. That's not specific enough. Your request should be amend the ordinance to support TNR, and here's suggested language, or Change the policy, the shelter policy, to allow them to transfer community cats to TNR groups so that they can be put through the TNR process rather than be euthanized. After making the request, you need to make your argument, and this is the meat or tofu of your speech. And we're going to go over sample testimony on the next slide. And at the end, always thank the council for their time and consideration, even if they've been rude and are looking at their iPhones the whole time. So sample TNR testimony, this is also available on our website, and I'll just read it. Hello, my name is Liz, and I am a resident of Bethesda, Maryland. First, I want to thank Senator Doyle and the council for allowing this dialogue. I am a fervent supporter of trap-neuter return because it is the only effective approach to cat management. I'd like to use this time to briefly explain some of the science behind feral cat populations. First and foremost, cats will always exist. Community cats will always exist. And you can see that I actually did not read that really well, so you're going to want to practice it so it's a little smoother than what I did. You're going to want to sound really polished. And you can go, again, you can go online to get the full testimony. Always remember, TNR is widespread. A lot of communities are afraid of sticking their necks out. They don't want to be the trailblazers that end up being ridiculed or criticized or wrong. Luckily for you, at this point, TNR is not a fringe movement. It's an established best animal control practice. And if you've seen my other presentation, you've seen these slides before. So I'm going to say it really quickly. TNR has experienced exponential growth in the last 10 years. Looking at this map of the United States, you can see that only 23 municipalities had laws in 2003. In 2013, that number was over 240. Today, the number is even higher. Most major cities practice or support TNR. Here are a few examples: Chicago, Miami, New York City, Washington, D.C., Jacksonville, and St. Louis. And kind of going to the reverse of that, so on one hand you want to think big, think nationally, you also want to think local. What groups or governments or shelters are supportive of TNR in your state and county already? As I just said, some communities don't want to be first. And if there are a few cities that have been practicing TNR for the last few years nearby, the council can rest assured that TNR will not result in the zombie cat apocalypse or something else ridiculous. And I definitely find this frustrating because there are tiny rural cities of 200 people to massive metropolises like New York City practicing TNR already, and they have been, some of them, for decades. So it's certain that a community similar to yours in size and landscape is doing TNR. But your city might only want to hear what their neighbors are doing, to the point that if you're in Texas, you could point out that a very similar city in New Mexico does TNR, but the legislator won't care, and he'll want to know who's doing it in Texas, or even who's doing TNR within the county. These are some extra tools to have in your arsenal when advocating for cats. Elevator pitches, action alerts and elevator pitches. We get lots of questions about action alerts, and unfortunately I've seen people send action alerts that can actually backfire and make things worse. So we're going to talk for a moment about how to send professional alerts. An action alert is just jargon for an email that goes out to many people and asks them to send an email or make a phone call to their representative on behalf of a policy or law or ordinance. They are a great tool for building community support for the law. There is sample text in our advocacy toolkit for people who want to send them. It's really easy. Email all your friends and family who live in the city, and this is important. Emails and phone calls have to come from actual constituents or voters. It really annoys legislators when they receive emails from people who don't live in the state. And this is particularly important in this day and age of Facebook, where you can quickly alert people in Nova Scotia what's going on in your town in Kansas. And you can thank the people in Nova Scotia for caring and standing in solidarity with you, but you don't want them actually emailing your small Kansas legislators. So I'm going to break it down into very easy steps. Open a new email message. Write a sentence introducing yourself and why you're writing. Ask people to copy and paste the below message, which you will provide, and send it to the legislators. Include a list of emails for the legislators so people don't have to look for it. The key is to make it really easy. You want them to just be able to copy and paste twice and send off an email of their own. And of course, thank them. Don't use crazy fonts. Keep a professional tone. Don't write things like, if you don't do this, a bunch of cats will die. It comes off as hysterical and can undermine your credibility. You've got to keep it simple. And I know that can be really rough because we're dealing with situations, life or death situations, where cats' lives are on the line. And you might want to express how you want to capture the emotion you're feeling. But it's really, you have to remember, first of all, you're an advocate for the cats. And in Alley Cat Ally's opinion, maintaining a level, professional tone is more effective. There's a sample action alert in our toolkit, and you can use those talking points about other laws to draft your own action alert if the issue is a feeding ban or a licensing law or what have you. An elevator pitch is simply a 1-minute speech that you memorize. You can start your meetings with legislators with it, or use it whenever you get a minute with someone, or anyone who will listen. Elevator speeches are designed to succinctly and persuasively get your point across. They're short because you might only get a few minutes with someone, aka elevators, how long it takes you to ride an elevator. And so here's a sample elevator pitch which you could use or make a variation of. Hi, I'm Mr. Alley Cat, and I volunteer at Alley Cat Allies. I care about animal issues, and I want our city to support trap-neuter-return because trap-neuter-return is the only effective way to decrease the community cat population. Adopting trap-neuter-return is the best way to reduce the number of community cats, save taxpayers money, and improve conditions at the municipal animal shelter. Thank you for your time. Very simple. And of course, if the person seems engaged, you're going to want to keep that conversation going for as long as you can and encourage them to ask questions. But this is the bare bones that you're going to get out if the person is in a rush. Dress the part. Now that we've covered how to advocate for TNR professionally, let's talk fashion. It's important to appear professional and polished whenever you interact with a legislator or government official, whether you're speaking at a formal council meeting or meeting privately with an individual legislator. And this is generally a good tip for your life, but it's especially important for animal advocates because there's still, unfortunately, a stigma associated with being someone who cares passionately about animals. And we need to contradict those old stereotypes like crazy cat lady. And I definitely empathize with you if you're not into fancy dress. I'm not either. In fact, as a young attorney, I got into some trouble because I wore a hooded sweatshirt with my college emblazoned on it every day. Not appropriate. I'm a little older now and I know better, but I definitely understand the inclination to want to dress comfortably. But I put on an uncomfortable dress and heels when I'm talking to a city council. General tips. Here are a few other tips that will maximize your effectiveness. First, always be polite, even if the other person is not. And you're likely going to encounter legislators who disagree with you, who are rude to you, and try to cut the conversation short. And you can't control them, but you can control how you react. So always be polite. Be kind. Don't speak negatively about other people's character. Just focus on the actions or the problems that might be occurring at the shelter. It might make you feel good in the moment to speak negatively about people, but it will, 1, make legislators think that you're petty and immature, and 2, it will make them defensive because you're talking about people who are either government employees or contractors that the government pays. So you don't want to attack specific people, especially people that these legislators might like or know personally or trust. You want to focus on verifiable problems like a low live release rate or the hundreds of community cats euthanized every year with no decrease in the overall cat population. And this takes us back to shelter transparency. This is why it can be really effective to request the intake and disposition numbers. And be professional, which is basically the motto of this webinar. Don't focus on individual animal stories or tell personal stories about your pet cat. The meeting needs to be laser focused on the issue and the benefits of what you're proposing.
All right, well, thanks so much, Liz. We are moving right along, and so like I said, now is the time where you can start submitting your questions. I will say that while you're thinking of some questions, be mindful of the fact that this is more of a public forum, and so we want to make sure that the questions that we address are broad and can apply to everybody. So if you do have more specific questions, Liz is, again, available via email, and her email will be on the next slide. But while you're thinking and typing, I do want to talk just a bit about National Feral Cat Day. It's coming up here on October 16th, but really we have celebrations happening all across the country all month long. So we encourage everyone out there to take the next step in your personal evolution to help cats by registering an activity with us. And you can go to that link there at the bottom of your screen. It's just nationalferalcatday.org. And after you register, you will receive a toolkit with some helpful materials and a couple goodies for you to share. And keep in mind that an activity can be the most simple thing, from just taking care of your colony to applying some of the things you learned in this webinar and reaching out and setting a meeting with your legislator. It's really anything and everything that's being done out there to help cats and recognize the people who care for them, like yourself. So that being said, we'll move right along. And as promised, you can see Liz's email on the screen, as well as some of the links we talked about during the presentation. So looking at your questions, our first question is, are privately owned shelters obligated to provide intake and euthanasia statistics upon request?
That is a great question, and unfortunately there are 50 different answers because it varies by state. So if they're entirely privately owned, meaning they have no contracts with the government, which is actually pretty rare these days, they're probably going to be pretty small shelters if they are not taking animals from anyone. They will never be required to provide statistics. It's always worth asking, though, because they might be into transparency, or you might find someone who doesn't know better and they give it to you. If the shelter contracts with the government, there's a much higher chance that they're going to give you the statistics. In places like Virginia, actually, everyone is required to report their statistics, even little rescue groups that may only have 5 animals a year. All that information must be submitted to the Virginia Department of Agriculture, and then it's posted online. So if you're in Virginia, you're lucky. You can just go right there and look. Michigan and Maine also have comprehensive data about their shelters. With the other shelters, it can go either way. Or I'm sorry, with the other states, it can go either way. I'd say if it's contracted, you should definitely give it a shot, and there's a good chance that they will respond. Unfortunately, sometimes it's led to litigation even. In Washington State, somebody submitted a public information request to a shelter that held the local city contract. The shelter refused. It went on in court for about 2 years, and eventually the judge found in favor of the requester. In other words, the judge found in favor of transparency and said taxpayers have the right to know how their tax dollars are being spent, and just because this is a private entity, because it receives taxpayer dollars, you've got to tell them the information. And I think in general we're also moving towards transparency. 2 years ago, I submitted public information requests to every county in the state of Maryland about their 2012 or 2013 statistics because we were interested in getting a better idea of what was going on. Every county except for one replied. And that was, and we weren't going to get into a court battle with this one county, so we just didn't get the information. A year later, the state legislature passed a new law requiring each shelter to send their intake and disposition numbers to the Department of Agriculture. So then I was able to get that information straight from the Department of Agriculture. And if you have any specific questions about requesting records, please email me. I'm happy to help you.
All right, so our next question, that was a very great answer, so thank you, Liz. Our next question says that my local animal services provides free TNR appointments, but it is reluctant to stop impounding feral cats because they say people will complain to their county commissioners. And how should she respond to that?
That is another great question, and now I'm thinking we need an FAQ number 4 because I hear that a lot. When you've got local animal services who are kind of 50% there, it's a tricky situation. Obviously, they recognize the benefits of TNR, but they're not going all the way. You need to respond to that by saying, first of all, the people who are complaining are going to still be complaining the next year because of the vacuum effect. So you're not actually solving the problem. It's not like you're appeasing TNR people and anti-TNR people. You're actually helping nobody, including the cats, because the cats are going to keep coming back. And we've even had stories of, I know there was one woman in Montgomery County, Maryland, who brought a batch of cats every year for about 10 years. Every year she brought cats in to be euthanized. I don't know why it never occurred to her that it might not be an effective solution, but things like that can happen. The other thing you're going to want to point out is that it's not very cost-effective for the county to keep on taking in cats and euthanizing them. Talking dollars can be really effective. Third, you want to be a resource or be viewed as a problem solver to your legislator. So you're going to want to learn about humane deterrence and talk about it. Now, generally, if you have these sort of general complaints, you could just tell the person about, or tell the legislator about coffee grounds or citrus or ultrasonic deterrence. But if this is like a big, I call them butt heads for lack of better words, if they're a big problem, this person is complaining to everyone, they're calling the news, they're calling the mayor, you might want to personally step in and buy them a deterrent. And I know that's really frustrating because you're already spending all this money on cats. Why do you have to spend money on a cat hater? But in the long run, it can save the entire program. Okay, are there any more questions? Looks like there are no more questions, so thank you so much for joining me today. Bree, any final words?
No, I would just again remind everyone to check out nationalferalcatday.org and register your activities with us. We'd love to have your support this year. And thank you for tuning in and giving us your time this afternoon. Keep an eye out in your email inboxes for that follow-up link to a survey. We would love to have your feedback. And otherwise, have a great day.